This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Disler, producer of the show. On today's episode, Mike and David are joined by Erik Robelen, a former Ed Week reporter, to talk about whatever happened to school inspections, what they are, how they might fit into accountability systems, and who's actually using them in U.S. schools. Then, on the Research Minute, Amber shares a study on how AI tools can help middle school math teachers personalize their lessons. All this and more on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. And now, please join me in welcoming our special guest for this week, Erik Robelen. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. Also joining us, as always, my co-host, David Griffith.
Hey, Mike. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, Erik, we have you listed here as an education writer based in the Washington, D.C. area. I mean, that's I might as well say like, oh, well, everybody knows that what that actually means is he's like in the CIA or something. It's so nondescript. Is it okay for me to say that you were a longtime Education Week reporter and
Yes.
then longtime staffer at the Education Writers Association?
Yes.
Okay.
I was a deputy director at EWA for 8 years.
Yeah.
And for those who may not, basically I was working with education journalists from around the country, helping them to kind of, better understand the issues. And we would put on events and provide all kinds of resources.
Yeah.
Even we created a fellowship program where we started giving out little mini grants to help them. So that was a great ride.
Very good. And I should say, in full disclosure, Erik is also a longtime friend, going way back to when I first came to DC in the late 90s. And we were reminiscing about young education professionals, which Erik accused me of starting in order to meet women, which, all right, that part is true. And I met my wife, Megan, and, happily ever after. So there it is. It was not an excuse for me to date women. I was just looking for, the love of my life. So there you go. All right. And taking advantage of the fact that education professionals in the DC area do skew heavily female, as does the I mean, it's true. At least it was true back then, David. I don't know if it's still,
Please keep talking, Mike.
I'm sure this is our listeners are enjoying this. I'm going to dig myself into a hole. Okay, let's stop with that and instead pivot to what we're talking about here today. Erik wrote a great article for Education Next recently. I was super excited about it. The title they gave it, and this part I was less excited about because I thought, I don't know, it didn't quite give everybody an understanding of it, but it was called The Full Measure of a School. I guess that's not too bad. But when I think about it, it's really about whatever happened to the idea of school inspections. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that on Ed Reform Update. All right, so Erik, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, there was a lot of buzz about school inspections. This was a practice in the United Kingdom that's been going on for a long time, Her Majesty's Inspectorate. And the notion was, hey, for those of us who are accountability hawks, even we will acknowledge that test scores are, imperfect measures and incomplete measures. And wouldn't it be great if, maybe not every year, but every so often, rather than just using test scores and grad rates, things like that to measure a school, we could actually send in a team of real live humans to spend time at a school, to watch instruction, to talk to teachers, students, maybe parents, and get a sense of the quality of the school. And maybe you could do that particularly for struggling schools, especially before making a decision like closing the school. Yep. Maybe you could do it on the high end for schools that you think might be exemplary, and before, giving them an award or maybe highlighting them as a place where other people should learn from, you want to go in and check the tires and make sure that it's as good as it looks to be on paper. So school inspectors. So the question now is like, what happened to this idea? And is there anybody in America who is still doing something that you might call school inspection? So what'd you learn?
Right. So what I learned, the short answer is yes, it is happening. And it's happening more than you might guess. But if you haven't heard about it, I'm not very surprised because it was challenging for me to kind of find out what the heck was going on. And this turned into quite the reporting journey to even try to answer the question of where is this happening and then what are they doing? What does it look like? And just to kind of circle back to my story and experience of this, I did a story way back in the day, and I think it was 2012 for Education Week, which was like, hey, there's this school inspections thing. My friend and former colleague Craig Gerald wrote a piece. It was like, yeah, on Her Majesty's School Inspection Service. So it was for education sector, the former think tank. And that kind of got my interest, and so I did some further reporting about it to learn what was going on this side of the pond, because that was more about what was going on elsewhere. But so there's quite a lot happening, and it took a while to kind of figure out where to go to get good information, and I eventually started to discover examples of, so there are some school districts who do this. Some of them, they do it for a little while and then they stop. Places like Cleveland did it for a little while, and New York City's been doing it for a long time. And Denver apparently is doing it now, so that you can find Norwalk, Connecticut is doing it. Everyone's heard about the Norwalk version of this, right?
It's famous.
Yeah, exactly. But so there was that piece of it, but a number of states are doing this, with their schools. And I learned one of the best examples that I learned about that's pretty new is Maryland, where this is the second year of a pretty ambitious plan to have visits to virtually every single public school in the state. We'll see if they get there. And the idea too is that some of them would have repeat visits. And so that was one of the places where they're really kind of going all in. And in fact, they are a place where they actually publish reports about them. And in the first year, they would have like even some kind of like a final, I won't use the word rating, but they would say, meets or exceeds, or exactly, I forget what the terminology is. Mm-hmm. Apparently this year, they've decided to hold off on that element of it, but still all of the information will be published, and you can go in and look at your local school and see what they learned.
Well, that as a Maryland public school parent, I'm excited about that, and I'll be curious to see how it compares, how these reports compare to the school ratings, right? I mean, this is always one of the big questions: is are they going to go in and find out that some of these schools that look terrible on paper are actually pretty decent, and there's something, there's some explanation for why it's not showing up in the test scores, or vice versa. Of course, there could be, say, very affluent schools that, where you could have the kids do yoga all day and they would do great on the test. You go in there, maybe the instruction's quite mediocre. Well, tell us a little, do you get a sense, what do these inspections look like? How long are they? Who are they sending in? Are they watching, teaching, and learning? I don't even know what to picture.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I learned through a few different avenues. I ended up talking to a couple of the organizations who do this for a living. They get hired to do it. So the American Institutes for Research contracts with some places. Also, there's an organization called SchoolWorks that has been doing, inspections for a long time. And by the way, it's like, can you put a price tag on this? You can. SchoolWorks told me that they charge anywhere from $16,000 to $50,000 for the full process. And what is usually involved is at least those organizations. So what I'm going to talk about is what, best practices are from places who are taking this seriously, because I can't say what everyone, we don't know exactly how some of them approach it. But for those who are really trying to be thoughtful and really have a system about it, they typically tap existing or often retired teachers, principals, researchers, and they have a real formal protocol, and everyone gets trained on it. and they get trained on it, every year for, I'm going to use a wonky term, you're going to be impressed here. Inter-rater reliability is really important with this, which is basically you got to make sure that it's not going to be just random, that one group of observers come in one day and another come in the next day, and they might have totally different findings. The idea is if you train people up and you have this procedure, then there can be some relative consistency around what it looks like. And what do they do? It varies, of course. But, one of the single most important ingredients is observing classrooms. A group will go in and I'm assuming in the best of them, they won't say, we're going to go to your classroom this time to this time, because not that you want to surprise people, but you want to feel like it's just not putting on a show. So they'll come in and they'll observe classrooms. And they often will interview teachers individually. They'll interview the principal. They might interview students and parents and, maybe guidance counselors. So they really want to get a picture of what's going on from different perspectives. Some of them even do review some student work. I recall at least one of the, and we'll talk about this later, how some charter school organizations, CMOs, do this. And I remember a number of them were talking about how they really wanted to look at examples of student work to kind of fill out the picture. But so their main, and the idea is to get beyond, the quantitative data to look at something more qualitative of what's going on and taking the temperature of a school. And, for good reason, they want former educators because they know, in fact, you hear this, there's this saying that a number of people kind of mentioned to me in my reporting. You can tell in like the first 5 minutes whether a school is well run or not. But you got to go beyond that. It's not enough just to kind of have that impression.
I love, all of this. And then I think, people on the show, listening to the show, have heard me say this a bunch of times or seen me write about how, I think, gosh, if we could figure out a way to deal with the political challenges and privacy challenges, get recordings of classrooms, right? Or just the transcripts, right? Transcribe what's happening in our classrooms. And then you could accompany, all of this in-person evaluation with also, let's have AI go crazy and try to make sense of, a bigger sample of classroom lessons, a bigger sample of student work, and make sense of it. You could really start to get some interesting information. And yeah, the charter management organizations do this to make sure that their individual schools are excellent and faithfully following their models in many cases. Charter school authorizers. We are a charter school authorizer at Fordham. We do this, right? Sometimes we are accused of being technocrats by our friends on the libertarian right because they say, oh, you want to close down these schools based on test scores or value added alone. Of course, we would never actually close down a school serving children without knowing that school intimately, which means being inside it and watching, teaching, and learning and getting a sense of the culture. So great authorizers have been doing this for a long time as well. David, what else do you want to know about this?
Well, yeah, I think the part I'm trying to wrap my head around is exactly, I can't tell if there is a single goal or multiple goals, right? So I tend to agree that you owe something like this to a school before you close it down, right? In fact, I had that written down. I was like, you can't, you have to have at least one observation, probably more, of a school before you close it down or replace the principal, et cetera. You can't just, toss the numbers in there. I guess what I'm struggling with, though, is it seems, you said $16,000 to $50,000, which is a lot of money, if you multiply it by every school. And so I guess my question is, does it have to be something that's done for every school? Is it something we can just do for the schools that are sort of in trouble? Because I have a hard time. I don't know. It seems like there are multiple goals. So I'd appreciate hearing, what you think the goals are and to what extent they're like sort of in tension with each other.
Or to put it a different way, Eric, like are most of the inspections today happening in struggling schools?
Yeah.
Right. So it's I'll say, and this gets back to the larger challenge that I had, is it's hard to be systematic because it's hard to, even what people call these, there's not, people don't call them inspections. Almost
Right.
no one in the US calls them inspections. Sometimes it's school quality reviews, sometimes it's site visits, school visits, just so even getting the terminology was challenging. And so I couldn't pretend to have, a strong sample. But what I will say is that in some states, they definitely prioritize. I'll give you the perfect example of this is Massachusetts, where it's actually they have a visit, program or whatever they call it in Massachusetts, and it's for schools that are low performing that have been identified through the state accountability system, and those that are kind of chronically in that system tend to get visited more often, so they are more likely to have repeat visits. That's where the Maryland one is quite different, and I'd leave it to the experts to decide whether this is a good idea or not. But that you might get one visit, and then you might or might not get another visit down the road. It does seem like ideally, there would be something to compare to, so that you would have some richer information. But there are places where they do seem to, have a priority on certain schools, which it seems like, at least in a few examples that I could find, that was pegged to test scores. So, which is obviously the kind of the centerpiece, for better or for worse, of school accountability systems.
Do you get any sense, Eric, if the educators in these buildings, do they find this fair? Do they find it useful? I mean, of course, there's a lot of nervousness when we talk about accountability, right? And if these are schools that, might be facing serious sanctions, although outside the charter sector, let's be honest, it's hard to find places these days that are actually, making low performing schools do anything uncomfortable. But let's assume that that is the case. I mean, are they more open to this than judgments based on test scores, as you would assume?
That's a great question. I tried, especially in Maryland, I tried really hard to get some school districts, and I reached out to the state teachers unions, I reached out to superintendents individually in groups. Not a single one responded. And I tried, I can be pretty persistent, it's the old reporter thing. It's just, I tried numerous paths to get someone to say, what do you guys really think about this? Is it helping? Do you like it? Do you think it's a waste of time? And I'm sorry to say that I never was able to get that voice. I'd love, an opportunity if I ever do more on this. I think that would be a great area to spend more time on. I heard anecdotes about it from, people who are involved with them who described that as long as they didn't feel like there was a hammer, coming along with this, and there usually is not, that, some of them often find it valuable. And some of the experts, who are kind of have been involved in designing these will say these are really about helping schools figure out how to improve. And it's hard when you get like this label and you're like, okay, what do we do? What are we doing right? Where are we struggling? And, a well-designed protocol could help you better identify these are some of the things going on that we really need to address so that we can, turn things around.
Okay. Very good. Interesting stuff, Erik Robelen. Thank you so much for for reporting on this and for letting us know about it.
Sure.
Again, you can check out his Education Next article. It's the full measure of a school.
And
we
don't
gotta get
forget that there's also at the bottom, there's a separate story connected to it about what's going on with the English system, which is going through major changes,
Yeah.
Which is a big deal too.
Excellent. That is good to say. I mean, we say this all the time, right? People are fine with these measurement systems as long as there's no consequences. But once there's consequences, things go sideways on either side of the pond. And
Yeah. And I found it pretty striking that, at least in the last couple of years, the big news in England is not the results of the inspections, but the school inspection system itself has been the subject of major news. So if you want to learn more about that, you should check out that side element to the story.
Thanks so much, Erik. It was a pleasure. Now it's time for everyone's favorite Amber's Research Minute. Amber, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Mike.
So, Amber, David, I'm curious, did you guys listen to the big Supreme Court case last week talking charter schools?
I didn't listen. I just read all of the commentary. So,
Likewise, I skimmed the oral arguments, and I have read many takes at this point.
Yes. I got to say, it's just so fascinating and kind of fun to hear these luminary legal minds talking about our issue.
Charter schools, I know, right?
And, in many cases, and also, of course, the folks arguing before the court, it is incredible what they do. I don't know how they do it, especially these ones, from the Solicitor General's office or others who do this all the time. And they're not experts on these, on religious charter schools, as this topic was, but they sounded pretty well informed. Although it was fun to hear the justices try to make sense of this. I think it was it Alito, was asking about, they're trying to figure out how much control the government has over these schools. And the guy from Oklahoma would say, well, I mean, we've got these expansive state standards. They even get into, how you deal with adjectives in this in ninth grade and how you deal with this in eighth grade and blah, blah, blah. And I think it was Alito said, well, I'm confused. I thought the whole point of charter schools was for them to have more freedom. So welcome to our world where we talk about, where do you draw?
Yeah. I know, right? We got to be taken back to these original aha questions sometimes.
So that was good, but we'll see. It is, yes, we've all read the takes, and I am convinced it could be a huge deal if they rule for St. Isidore. And I don't know. I understand why our friends in blue states are very nervous about what could happen. So now it's up to the courts, probably up to the Chief Justice.
We shall see.
Yeah.
But I thought it was, people were coming down all over the place. So, I don't know. Just like you're trying to read through their questions, how they might be leaning, Yes.
Indeed.
So
okay. Well, we will follow that when the decision comes out, of course, which should be probably in late June. But until then, we got plenty of research to dig into. What you got for us this week?
We do a new small-scale descriptive study. I like this one because it digs into our favorite topic of AI. Everybody's talking about these large language models. So now we're going to see if they can support curriculum scaffolding, which I love because that's this term that sort of gets bandied about, and it's supposed to mean that teachers can somehow get kids to understand grade level material when they're not on grade level. So they're supposed to come up with these scaffolds that kind of get kids there, but doesn't really tell them the answer, but kind of gets them closer to the answer and the understanding. So teachers, when they scaffold, they have to analyze the current curriculum. They have to identify what students might struggle with, and then they have to design an appropriate adaptation or intervention or supplement to help them get over that hurdle that they have. So it's pretty time intensive. It's hard to do. And the hope is that an LLM model can help teachers on this front, save them time, et cetera. So they use a GPT 4.0, which I thought, is that the same thing as ChatGPT? And apparently it's not. It's a bigger, better, more powerful version that they seem to be coming out with weekly. They use that to develop these scaffolds in middle school math, and they compare the quality of the LLM to expert teacher scaffolds. The study involved multiple stages, beginning with recruiting 6 middle school math teachers from 2 public school districts in Washington State and Illinois. They were hand-selected by their administrators based on their, minimum of 10 years experience. But more than that, they were perceived to be experts by the principal, apparently not on any kind of test scores and so forth, but we know principals have a pretty good idea of who their best teachers are in the building. They administered to these teachers weekly surveys. They had interviews where the teachers provided their district's curriculum for the lessons that they were going to teach that week. And then they provided like what they were really going to teach, right? Like the hidden curriculum versus the real curriculum, and how they intended to change that curriculum, and why. So descriptions of that, why they changed, what they had to change and why. They said one of the biggest issues they had was a gap between the curriculum materials and the current level of their students, which is kind of what we're talking about with scaffolding anyway, and the amount of content that the curriculum is supposed to cover that they don't think they can cover. So they identify the types of strategies that this is the researchers that the teachers most often use. And it basically centered around activating and refreshing student background knowledge, because, you got to be able to connect new with what you already know. And apparently that's a part that's missing a lot, the teachers say. And they often have to add visual aids to help students understand complex terminology or symbols. And sometimes they do a lot more step-by-step demonstrations and think alouds so the kids can hear how they're problem solving themselves and how they want the kids to be problem solving. So that's what they are normally doing. And they say, sometimes it's just a small adaptation. Sometimes it's having to figure out a supplement to kind of do this stuff. So they target their study with LLMs just on this idea of activating and refreshing background knowledge. Okay, because this could kind of go everywhere. So they had to target it. And those were supposed to relate to certain lessons at hand. So then the teachers said, okay, here's the 10 lessons we're teaching over the next 2 weeks. They drew the lessons from the illustrated math content, which was a textbook they were using in 6th grade. And then they were asked to create these scaffolding activities relative to background knowledge that were concise enough to fit on one slide for below level kids. And then they basically made all of the slides look alike. So, you couldn't tell what was the LLM one, what was the teacher scaffolding. And they had to do with certain topics like ratios, number system. So anyway, they made sure everybody was on the same page, both the AI and the teachers. And then they asked 50 practicing teachers that were in the classroom, math teachers, to judge these things. And they were supposed to look at the LLM related to the teacher ones. And then they had to give different prompts to the LLM, right? To figure out, okay, how much information are we giving the LLM? So this is kind of a fair, evaluation. And one prompt, they just gave the LLM the original curriculum's idea of a warm-up, because illustrative mathematics has a prompt as well. And the second time they gave it another prompt that had like, here's the learning goals of the lesson. Here's the best practice for creating an effective warm-up. And in there, they put in some of the information they learned from the teachers in the interview, like what makes an effective warm-up. And then the third thing was they used the warm-up from the curriculum plus the teachers' comments about why they scaffolded like they did. Okay, because the teachers had to write down. Remember, they had to explain why they scaffolded. All right, so then you got the 3 different ways you can prompt the model, and then you've got the teachers' scaffolds. All right, so you have 500 comparisons, which is a lot, completed relative to all those varied conditions pertaining to helping struggling students and alignment to objectives. There were like 4 criteria. All right, what do we think it found?
I'm nervous that the bots are going to beat us, but I really don't know. I don't know.
I'm guessing some combination of bot and human. I wasn't tracking every comparison, but some combination of bot and human expertise.
Yes, David. Ding, ding. That is correct. So in general, when you're just looking at all the LLM variations versus the expert teachers thing, the LLM always won out. But when you were looking at which prompting of the LLM performed the best, it was the one that actually used the teacher information as well, and not just the teacher scaffold by itself. So yeah, it was a combination of human and LLM that performed well. And the instructors say, hey, isn't this how it's supposed to be? Aren't we humans supposed to be improving upon what we get from AI and LLMs and all that good stuff? So that's what I've got for you.
Okay. Well, I guess that's happy news for man and machine, or woman and machine. I guess again, the word scaffolding and you described it really well, but I guess, like, is this doable? I mean,
Right.
in a real classroom
I
at
mean,
all?
I felt like it's what you do, period. Like you always activate prior knowledge when you're getting ready to teach new content. So I just feel like we hear this a lot. Like what's good for struggling kids is often good for all kids.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm with you. I'm no expert in the whole scaffolding thing, honestly.
Hmm. Hmm.
I guess, yeah, I don't know. I agree that it's sort of just almost like what teaching is, right? But I guess my gut reaction is pretty positive to this, right? I don't know. This to me, this is what technology is for, right? And it's not for replacing corporeal schools with playgrounds and flesh and blood teachers. It's not for replacing human to human interaction. It's for offloading a whole bunch of tedious stuff, right? That we know we need to do, that it takes us a long time to do. And I mean, I would guess that there are teachers who are already doing stuff like this out there. In other words, it wouldn't shock me to find that there are thousands of teachers out there who are, have their laptop either at home or at their work desk and are feeding stuff into it and just asking the computer to generate a bunch of stuff in, let's be honest, seconds, right? And then subtracting the stuff that doesn't make sense and getting there, or getting almost there in a tenth of the time that they used to. So I don't know. I'm not sure that we need to nail down every possible way that can happen, right? Or scaffolding seems like a pretty good starting place, but I wholeheartedly endorse the replacement of certain teaching tasks or the sort of enhancement of certain teaching tasks with this technology. I don't think teachers should be nervous about that at all at an ethical level or kind of. Frankly, I trust the models. I do. I think they are now good enough that we can lean into this and not worry that they're going to, assign texts from Mein Kampf or something. Like they're pretty good.
Yeah.
Less hallucinating is what you want to say.
There might be a
That's
little
what they used to call
hallucinating,
it.
but
Yes.
every now and then, can we be real? Like every now and then, like actual human beings hallucinate too. Like you'll say something and then later you'll realize it wasn't right.
Mhm.
This happens to like people as well. So I think having a flesh and blood human check a computer's work is a reasonable compromise for all of us. Like why wouldn't we want to do that? We're already doing that with calculators and everything else, right? You press divide, and then if it looks off by 3 orders of magnitude, you think, maybe I typed in an extra number by accident, right?
Right.
But you don't just say, well, we're not going to use calculators, right? I think this makes a lot of sense, and it would shock me if teachers weren't already doing it.
My main concern on this one is how it feeds into the debate around differentiation and grouping. We are a rare organization that says, hey, we are comfortable, certainly by middle school and high school, to have kids grouped by their current ability level, like especially in math. If you're ready for Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, let's put you all in the same classroom, right? And there's some people out there that are still make the anti-tracking, anti-ability grouping argument. This is no, let's keep the groups heterogeneous as long as possible, and we'll just ask teachers to differentiate instruction, which sounds impossible, but maybe with these AI tools is a little less impossible than it used to be, right? If they can come up with, say, if the AI could come out with personalized worksheets and handouts and problem sets based on where the kids actually are. I mean, again, maybe that's cool, but I just worry that it's, I don't know, gonna encourage maybe some bad practice. You're smiling, David. What do you think?
I think this is one of those good problems, Mike. Like the differentiation argument isn't going to go away because there's something to it, even if it can be taken too far. And I think we should like it if it's more feasible than it used to be. That's just we should just sort of move all of the options in a positive direction and continue to have this debate about where the line should be. I don't know. I think you're overthinking it. That's just my feeling.
I actually love that idea of being able to study how AI does with differentiation. Like somebody hopefully is doing that, right? Because in my mind, customized learning really is inputting where every child is and where each skill that every child's struggling with. I mean, that's a lot of background research to do, right? And if AI can do it for us, if we're putting in gradually all of their interim and formative assessment and so on and so forth, like it should be identifying where they struggle a lot sooner, and being able to come up with these scaffolding unique to each student. Like that is like mind blown, right? If we can do that.
I was arguing against these things, people. Come on.
I know, but like, Mike, could we actually solve the problem that you're talking about? I don't know.
You finally like one of my ideas, and it's the opposite of my idea.
I get the concern, Mike, right? I mean, we can't just assume that everything's possible now, right?
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yeah. No, but all right. Yeah. Okay. Next one to study. There we go.
Yes.
All right, guys. Well, I do think that is all the time we've got for this week. And so until next week,
I'm David Griffith.
And I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.